The last kind of big theme that came out pretty clearly was around the concept of how do you maintain human connections. And it was clear that those human connections were really important. And we did a couple, again, simple surveys around these aspects, because the data showed us that meetings that we classified as social meetings, just by looking at different topics of meetings, they increased by about 10%. So people were definitely using meetings to just, maintain that social connection with people that they work with. We also saw one-to-one meetings. So a meeting that not necessarily with people in their own team or with their manager or whatnot, but meetings that were just two-person meetings, they increased by 20%. So just the use of those meetings to stay connected to people was clearly being shown in the data. And we then kind of translated this to that question I mentioned in the beginning, or the hypothesis we had about networks. And this is something that I think was really interesting, is we saw across the board, and we actually broadened our look here. We looked at, like 90,000 Microsoft employees, and their networks before and after going to work remotely, the size of their networks essentially remained consistent. So for the most part, everyone was able to maintain the network and the connections they had with employees, which was pretty remarkable, I think. The fact that you take everyone who sat in offices and you send them all home, and they're basically able to maintain a network of the same size, was pretty interesting. And we did some further looks into that by looking at different job functions, and we definitely saw those things were different by job functions. So you look at our sales team, for example, they're used to working on the road, and they're kind of always in a mobile state anyway. Their networks remain pretty consistent. If you look at some engineers, for example, even in those times when they were able to maintain their network, they didn't always maintain it with the same sets of people. And so there were some learnings there that were more specific. So the data has been really interesting. We've just been kind of intrigued by it, but the real outcome of it is, what can we do with that data? And so I think across Microsoft, there is a lot of focus on how do we make sure that we're continuing to do things differently to kind of recover from what we've been doing, but then also to reimagine how things might need to be in the future. And a lot of it is just starting with things that are really small, right? So the emphasis on well-being and making sure everyone understands the resources that they have at their disposal. The data about manager one-on-ones was one that really created this campaign to say to managers, hey, make sure you do spend time with your employees. This can be really helpful, and have those regular connections. And then other things like, in my broader org, we have started to do a recharge Friday, every other Friday, where there's no meetings, no Teams collaboration on a Friday. And people can use that for what they need to. It could be to do really deep focused work. It could be to tend to their family. It could be to catch up on other things. But the idea is you've got some time that we as an organization, and we're saying it's okay to take this time to manage what you need to do with your work-life integration to respond from that. So yeah, it's been really interesting. And what we're now doing is starting to think about, as we have some places in the world that are going back into the office, so starting to think about, okay, as we do that, what are the ways this data can help inform that? And specifically around physical workspace, what are the things we think will change? What are the things we think will stay now in this quote unquote new norm? And so that's been an interesting thing as well.
That's great. I appreciate the overview. It's just, one thing that's amazing to me is the way I took your study and what you just described is that you found a lot of positive impacts that came from working from home, like a lot of good news. Particular, the the managers finding a more effective way, right, to work with their teams so that they could really help them be more productive, right, and not spin their wheels. I mean, that's really, I think, helpful insights for credit unions. You kind of alluded to this a little bit now that you're starting to think about the future, right? And I know Microsoft and your campus is undergoing a pretty radical transformation right now. Are there any insights you're gathering in the work from home, data collection that may be driving decisions around the built environment for you guys?
Yeah, that's an interesting space. In fact, even before the pandemic hit, my team has worked pretty closely with the real estate team in Microsoft to think about how this type of data can help inform those decisions we make about real estate. And you can think about it kind of in a couple of perspectives. So one is decisions about what the physical space is actually designed like, right? So it was mentioned at the beginning, Mark, you mentioned that, buildings are really an enabler of people to do their work. And so the better you understand the working patterns that those people are using to do their work, the better you can design the space to give them employees what they need. And so if you think about understanding the collaboration and working patterns of your employees, then you can make decisions about, do we need, breakout rooms? Do we need big conference rooms? Do we need neighborhoods? Do we need big open spaces? Do we need offices? It's like those types of questions are questions that I know Microsoft's real estate team has gone through and tried to answer over the last, probably 5 to 10 years, I would imagine. And they have used this type of collaboration data to help do that. And we've done some experiments to say, hey, let's take this team and let's put them in a 15-person neighborhood that's open space with, a bunch of movable furniture and a little breakout room next to it. And then let's put another set of engineers that are essentially doing the same work in a different configuration. And let's measure with data which seems to be more effective, right? So which is driving more collaboration, which is driving more productivity with measures of how that group measures their engineering productivity. And so there's a lot of that has always been happening.
Right.
Specifically with the pandemic, trying to really think about how do we understand in the first stage is who needs to come back to the office first.
Right.
I think that's the question that everyone's trying to answer. And then the second is what's the most effective way to bring people back in this sort of hybrid scenario where you can't fully occupy your buildings. And so we've been working with Microsoft and with some other customers as well to say, well, if we have this data about collaboration, we can actually look at the people who spend the most time collaborating with other people that they would be co-located with. And we know the capacity of our buildings. And so let's actually say, these are the groups of people that should come back first. And when they come back, they should come back along with these other teams because they spend a lot of time collaborating. And then even optimizing where they sit based upon the amount of collaboration that certain teams do together. Yeah. And so that's something that is being done right now as we're starting to think about what's our strategy of coming back into an office.
It's really interesting. One area that you didn't get into too much, but that really interests me is how does the work from home environment impact the ability organization-wide, right, to drive the business forward? I think you call it business continuity. Do you have any thoughts or recommendations on what data points you could be considering to understand how working from home is impacting the mission of the business and executing on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think this concept of, maybe there's two parts that I'll hit on. One is the concept of business continuity and how do companies look at that? I think what I have learned, especially in kind of the early months of the pandemic from talking with a bunch of customers, is historically when they thought about how do I manage risk in my company and get ourselves set up to be prepared to maintain business continuity, a lot of those conversations were around things like infrastructure and supply chain and technology. And maybe when you get into the people side of things, maybe like leadership, having plans around if key leaders leave the company and so forth. But very few companies that I have talked to thought about their full workforce as being super important to how resilient they were to get through a change or a disruption like what we went through. And so I think that first question of business continuity is, do you actually focus on how to maintain the continuity of your people and your teams? And do you have the things in place to do that? And then that morphs into the question about data, which is, what data do you have to help you understand if you are actually maintaining that continuity? And I talked with a gentleman at a pretty large company here in the US. He was the COO of that company, and he said this was like 2 weeks after they sent their employees home, and he said, "Hey, we just sent everybody home. I know things have changed, but I have no idea what has changed, by how much, and where it's changed to in a point where we need to react." He's like, "I have no visibility to that." And so it resulted in this pretty interesting conversation about, well, what are the types of things that you are worried about? And so then when you get into this conversation of data, there's this set of things that companies have always struggled to measure around their employee well-being and culture and all those sorts of stuff. And really the only traditional way that companies have done that is through surveys. And this is where we think like bringing new technology into that conversation around what data you can get your hands on is a game changer in how you can manage your business, because all of a sudden you've got near real-time data that you can track things that are pretty tied closely with the culture of a company, like how people are collaborating and how they're working together and how much time they're spending working and at what times of the day is that happening. And it gives you that view of, are things changing over time? And if they're changing, we can react to that. And we've tried to, in parts of Microsoft, we've set up these little dashboards that leaders have that they can see, aggregated at the team level. It's not about monitoring your employees, but it's looking for those places where we think, hey, we might need to go focus here because things look like they may be going in the wrong direction. We see after hours work spiking in this team over here. And, they used to have on average an hour of after hours work. Now they've got 10 hours of after hours work. Let's go focus on that. Or we used to see these two teams collaborating together all the time. And now that's stopped happening. And so we think that might have a business impact. So let's go focus there. So I think that concept of bringing new data into the conversation that can be something that's monitored, much more proactively than doing an annual engagement survey, I think is really useful.
That is very interesting. I think right now, just remind folks that if you do have any questions for Erik or me, feel free to put those into the chat box. And Erik, I think briefly, just because in the name of time, I'm going to ask you a couple quick questions. The rise of the 30-minute meeting, so important, or so interesting, I think, and impactful, right? Do you anticipate this shifting back when there's a move back to face-to-face rather than virtual? And do you have any thoughts on how you could kind of preserve the culture around shorter meetings in the future?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind there is I don't think the workplace will go back to exactly what it was before, right? I think there's going to be a lot more of this hybrid work, which I think will ultimately keep a lot of that shorter meeting culture when you've got that hybrid work where people are spending more time working remotely. I think some of it will go away by nature of some of those short meetings that are being used to just maintain connections are replaced with physical doing that physically, in the workspace. But at the same time, I think if you're a company and you're kind of looking at this type of thing and you've got data about it, you can start to see if it's shifting away and you're starting to get this meeting bloat again, and you can react to it. So I think that's another thing that is a change for the better, is companies are actually starting to think about this kind of stuff. And I think that ultimately will help, if the old sayings of you never manage what you don't measure, well, having the data will help companies kind of keep their eyes on these things. And if they like the shifts that have been made, then they can actually try and maintain those just by having information about it.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. So I know that you're no longer, are currently doing that slog of a commute down Montlake Boulevard and across Lake Washington, right to the Microsoft campus. So you have an extra hour a day in your pocket. I'm right. What are you using that time for? More work? And I hope not. I mean, and when you do, I assume you will return, a large part to the office. I mean, how hard is it going to be to give that up?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the morning commute has turned into more work, which I should probably do a better job of turning that into something that's better for me personally. But the evening commute has definitely turned into me having more dinners with my family. Like that has been a huge positive for me, and something that I think I've realized that I should forever try and retain that in some way. And so I think that's a positive. I think the one thing that I have missed about the commute is the commute was actually a good way for me to kind of close out my day, especially in the evening. In the morning, more about like time for me to reflect on, hey, here's what I got to do. And at night, thinking about, okay, here were the important things of that day. Let me get myself ready for tomorrow, and then have that physical disconnection from work. That's something that is gone that I actually miss, right? And so I would welcome that back, but I think I will definitely try and maintain some of the things I've gotten from not having that commute. I definitely enjoy it.
Yeah, here. I think I'm right about the same boat as you. Though I'm actually in our office today. We're back part-time. We've broken up into some teams. So I'm going to move on to the last part of our conversation here. I hope everyone can see my presentation now, and just wanted to take a moment and give a few recommendations, and really got to kind of start by saying I've done a bit of a straw poll with the credit unions we work with, and it does seem that there's a pretty large group of you who intend to return to the physical work environment, the corporate office, and largely the same way you were working there before, which isn't terribly surprising to me. But I think that there are a lot of prognostications out there and people who are kind of defining and declaring how the office will be. And I think, frankly, we just don't know, in my opinion, that the data is just not available yet as to the impact remote work will have on organizations in the long term. So that said, in addition to the insights we shared earlier, I think we do have a few tips on how you could perhaps start to blend a better existence between the corporate office and a work from home program, something that's going to benefit your organization. And so the first, just gather the evidence and use a tool like a scorecard. So it doesn't have to be all at none, which is, I think, kind of what Erik was describing, kind of more of a hybrid environment. And it's certainly not going to be a one size fits all scenario. Some credit unions may be in costly urban centers with terrible commutes, difficult securing real estate, hard to get access to talent, and high cost of living, right? Well, the benefits of remote work may be greater for those credit unions than ones who don't have those challenges. So those are things to consider. And another is really, which of your team members, which of your departments are best suited for remote work? What evidence could you gather around those teams, around maybe how well remote work is working now, to help you decide whether that's something you want to try, define success around, and then measure data to see if it's working. Second bit of advice really is to build your solutions both from the bottom up and the top down. And so you're certainly going to want to talk to your employees and find out what they think they need and what is working well about work from home or work from the corporate office. But just be aware that self-reporting, especially in a time like this, is not going to be free from bias and influence. If you ask an employee how well work from home is working a week after 2 of their children started remote school, and it's in the soggy Pacific Northwest, October weather, their response might be a lot different than how it was going back in July on a beautiful day when they appreciated the flexibility to go outside for a walk. So be wary of self-reporting, and also when I say build the solution from the top down, really be thinking about what your credit union needs as a whole for the business in terms of collaboration, innovation, recruiting, training for team members. Third, I think this is really important. You do have a bit of a new competitor, and that's the work from home experience. So when you do return team members to the office, it's going to be very fresh in their mind what they liked and enjoyed about working from home. And that is going to create a negative sentiment around those areas in the corporate office. So if you can identify those areas, the top areas that were better about working from home, then you can come up with a strategy to address the gap and perhaps make the work from the corporate office experience more equivalent to the work from home in that area. The fourth, we talked about this a bit, is just nurture a cultural acceptance of remote working. The genie's out of the bottle, so to speak. You've given employees permission to work remotely. You've built some of the infrastructure and the processes around remote work. So perhaps consider remote work as just one of your tools, again, a hybrid environment or a way to create a perk or a benefit for your team and your team members. And lastly, do focus on well-being. You really can't go wrong here. So be thinking about work-life balance, disruption and stress, what people like about flex time or that free time they got from not commuting. Even things like density in the work environment, right? Maybe corporate offices were getting too dense and that was a problem. So perhaps think about how you can provide more space and ability for people to focus. And on that, I think I'm going to go back here to Michael. If you want to, I don't know if we have any questions.
Yeah, we're about out of time. We have a couple questions that maybe I can just get one in out of respect for our time here. But early on, Erik had mentioned, some of the additional burden on managers. And the question is, what do you suggest managers do to help make the burden more manageable? So do you see that as a technological solution, an operational solution, both? But how do we avoid burning out our first line managers?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know if I have a really great answer for it. I can tell you what one of the things that we did at Microsoft was a real emphasis on kind of the soft side of that, which is making sure managers know that it's not all on them, right? Like I think we saw a lot of burden because they were trying to help their teams help their teams from a well-being perspective, also make sure that business was continuing to move forward. Just a lot of responsibility, and this emphasis on, hey, managers, it's not all on your shoulders, and you need to focus on yourself as well. And there was just a really big push on for managers to focus on themselves. So I don't know if that's the ultimate answer, but it's one thing that was done at Microsoft, because I think that was something that is almost like a no-brainer. Let's go try it and see if it works. And I think from my team's perspective, I've gotten pretty positive feedback from my managers on that. I think ensuring technology works is always helpful, because then managers don't have to deal with challenges that are associated with that, but that's how we approached it. So I don't know if it's a great answer, but that's the experience that I have there.
No, it's good. I'll just do one more here, and either Mark or Erik. Given that this is obviously an unprecedented time, how long would you recommend or expect for the remote work or work from home norms to emerge, so that you could say there's actually a baseline to benchmark against? Is it a year, 2 years, or I mean, do you have any thoughts around that?
I mean, I can share one thing just from what we've seen in the data. Like, we've seen the working patterns essentially start to level off. So in my perspective, what we see in collaboration patterns, they've kind of hit a more stable. So we saw like big spikes in things in the month following when everyone was sort of sent home, and then stuff started to come down a little bit, and then they sort of leveled off. And we've seen that level off now, since, like June, July, in the data that we look at around collaboration patterns. Now there's other aspects of that I think move a little more slowly, but for collaboration signals specifically, we've seen it level off.
Okay. Mark, did you want to add anything?
I mean, anecdotally, I think we've seen the same thing, both in the credit unions we speak with and on our own team, kind of a settling in, I think, to a pattern here.
Okay. Well, we're a little bit over time, so we'll wrap it up there. We would offer to share the material that was presented today. We'll note on the last slide of the material, there are some links, including a link to Erik's HBR article, the white paper that we referenced from Momentum, that we can send that out to everyone that participated today. Mark just brought that up on screen. And then, of course, if you have any additional questions or thoughts or anything that comes to mind, feel free to reach out to us. But we certainly appreciate you giving up 45 minutes of your day to spend some time with this. We think this stuff is really interesting, and please let us know if we can offer up any other insights. But with that, we'll conclude the webinar, and we really appreciate everyone participating.
Thank you. Thanks, Erik. Appreciate it. Thanks,
Yep.
Mike.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.